I used to pray I wouldn't see it, again and again every night, buried beneath a pile of moth-eaten quilts, the only shield I had against the suffocating cold of that ancient farmhouse. But even then I could feel it, that presence, that unseen force that drained every trace of warmth from the room and left nothing behind but a crawling, paralyzing dread. It was like something had latched onto me and pumped me with venomous anxiety. The worst part was, even though I couldn't see it, if I held my breath, I could hear it quietly approaching across the creaky floorboards of the house, making its way to me. Dad worked long shifts at the plant, gone before sunrise, home after dark, always too tired to ask questions. Mom, well, I'm not really sure where she went. When she was around, she mostly slept or stared blankly at the television with Dad. The house had been her family's, passed down like some rotten heirloom. She'd grown up in it with her mother, father, brother, and sister, none of whom we ever saw. She never explained why, just mumbled things about property disputes after my grandfather had died. Something ugly about who inherited what. It always seemed to come back to the house. Though we didn't speak to Mom's family, there were stories whispered between my parents or from distant relations when they would visit throughout the years. One of those stories stuck with me. When Mom was a child, her older cousin, who lived just across the street, contracted rabies. Instead of taking him to a doctor, his family staked him outside like some wild animal. They let him rave and howl until the disease burned through him. Mom told me she saw him once before he died, crawling across the ground in jagged, awful movements, foam clinging to the corners of his mouth, his eyes glazed. Maybe they thought it was the only thing they could do for him. Or maybe the land just demanded sacrifices in the form of our suffering. Then there were stories about my grandfather. Strange, half-believed things muttered like prayers or curses. Mom said he'd been blown up in a chemical plant explosion. That's how she phrased it, blown up. Baby boomers had this weird way of talking about trauma, like naming it made it smaller. But my grandfather survived. He clung to his steel beam with one arm while fire consumed the plant below. Dad said although my grandfather was a small man, he was tough. Tough the way all the men in our family were after the war. World War II had hardened them in ways no one liked to talk about. They came back from faraway jungles and blood-soaked islands, but not all of them came back right. Sometimes I wondered if something came back with him. Maybe the curse was older than him, its roots sunk deep in the bones of the old house. Or maybe he brought it with him, from New Guinea, from the war, from someplace my bloodline wasn't meant to survive. The strangest story was the one about his capture. The story goes that he and part of his platoon had been taken by a remote tribe, one the brass said were confirmed cannibals. My grandfather had thought on his feet, trading the tribesmen parts of their jeep, mirrors, shards of glass, anything that wasn't tied down, for their lives. In return, the tribe's elders gave him and his company uncut gemstones. Gifts, they said, or payment, or maybe a burden. He died when I was 5. I only have fragments of memory of him, a distant look in his eyes, the same unreachable stare Mom would wear for hours. He used to burn things in a barrel out back. Most families had burn barrels then, an easy way to get rid of leaves, branches, things you didn't want to carry. Mom once said she nearly burned the woods down playing house with her dolls, making pine straw kitchens and trying to cook them dinner. Grandfather also had a habit of standing at the end of the long gravel drive, watching the road. I remember that about him. He'd take me sometimes, my small hand lost in his thick leathered fingers. We'd just stand there silent as cars passed by one after another, watching, always watching, until I got bored and tried to tuck him back to the house. But he barely moved, like something was still out there, and he was waiting. These stories were the air we breathed, things unspoken but understood. I accepted them with the same quiet resignation my parents did. I didn't have a choice. I did manage to make a few friends growing up, but most were kids from school who came over once for a sleepover and never came back. They'd cry at night, sometimes soft sobs, sometimes loud enough to wake the entire house. By morning, their faces were pale, their voices shaking. They said my house felt wrong, that there were faces in the shadows in places they never should have fit. I'd see them at school after the summer or after the Christmas holidays. They would tell me the same thing. My house was weird, I was weird, and their parents said they shouldn't talk to me anymore. I never blamed them because every night beneath those threadbare quilts I prayed. I prayed not to see it, and every night I heard it coming. The thing, as I had come to call it, would linger just outside the threshold of my bedroom door. I don't know how I knew, but the sound of its approach would always stop there. Sometimes I was lucky and I would fall asleep before it would come for me, but for the most part, I wasn't so lucky. All I could do was stare into the shadows where I knew it stood. My father admitted to having heard it. My parents would sometimes see it come to my room as the shadow of a man just outside the corner of their eyes. It was the only way they ever said they saw it, but I knew that vision was a lie. Whatever was coming to my doorway at night had never been alive. Although I come from a religious family, I didn't think it was some fallen angel or demon. It was something else. It was its own thing, and no name really did it justice. As I meandered through my adolescence and into my teen years, it only grew in power, fed by our misery. Maybe it was because I had my mind on other things like boys or music or even high school drama in my part-time job. Always I dreamed of a way out of the house, a way out of the fear. Not even to escape poverty or our sad lives, just a way to get away from the thing that lived on the cusp of my shadow. By the time I was 15, it had learned to slam doors and click light switches that were no longer wired to anything. The faucet would turn on at random when I was home alone, and I continued to ignore it, because that was the easiest way. That was the only way. Only once do I recall Mom said anything about its activity without making light of it. Dad had been working away in Kansas on a job. Work had become scarce, and that left just the two of us in the house, living on Chinese takeout and fast food. Mom had lost the will to cook when Dad was away, you see. It happened when I was absorbed in some internet chat room talking to online friends I'd made over shared interest. Somewhere in the back of the house, I could hear my door distinctly slam shut. I assumed it was Mom leaving a stack of clean clothes in my bed. But when I continued to ignore it, several loud bangs reverberated from down the hall. "Stop that! What's got into you?" Mom shouted. "That's not me," I sighed under my breath. The thing had won. For now. The sound continued. I already knew what it was, but Mom sprang past me, going for the pistol on her bedside table. I decided to follow her, and we crept down the hall together. As we rounded the corner, we caught one last glimpse of my door slamming itself and then slowly creaking open, as if something had released the knob and disappeared inside us not to be seen. My mother was on high alert. She was more lucid than I'd seen her in, really, forever. "Open the door. I'll cover you," she said, the pistol poised steadily over my shoulder. I did as I was told. I pushed the door open to nothing. My empty room. My empty bed. 2 windows with measured sticks in them as not to be opened from the outside. In a house that was off the ground by at least 2 feet with a crawl space underneath. I guess someone tall with a ladder could have pulled themselves up from the outside. But none of the windows would open that way, either nailed shut or wedged closed like mine. I know, super safe, but it was the 90s in Nowhereville. "I know I heard something. I saw." "Yeah, we did. It was the thing again." "Are you still going on about that?" Her powder blue eyes flashed up to meet my own, and she laughed. "I thought you had grown out of obsessing over those silly old stories," Mom said, lowering the pistol down at her side. "Just got busy, I guess, with other stuff. You know, I used to think something like that there was something scary that was coming to me. I used to see it like it was there, but not there." "What did it look like?" I asked, way more enthusiastic than I meant. But this may have been my only chance. Any other time I asked, Mom had changed the subject or said I was just a fraidy cat. Now there was proof. Proof that my parents had been gaslighting me my entire childhood. The faraway look in her eyes returned, and she didn't say anything for a long time. I waited, almost sure I'd missed my chance until she spoke up again. "Like thick white smoke. Like when we would burn pine straw at the camp to catch the logs on fire. Remember?" I nodded. She didn't say anything else, just slipped away to return to the couch. I thought about the faces that the sleepover kids had mentioned. That image had been much worse to me, but maybe the thing appeared as something different to everyone and at different times. A man-shaped shadow in the hall, a cloud of white smoke, faces in the dark. Whatever it was, it knew us, and it was still watching. Dad worked off until I was 16. Pipe fitting had taken him across the South, but it came to an end after a job in Galveston. One weekend he came home quieter than usual, thinner too, and one night, while nursing what he thought was the worst stomachache of his life, Mom rushed him to the ER. His appendix had ruptured 3 days earlier. By the time doctors figured it out, the damage had been done. They told us to buy a casket. For weeks he drifted in and out of a haze of tangled tubes, his body fighting the infection while the morphine and antibiotics kept him straddling a fragile line. I remember sitting by his bedside watching the sweat bead on his brow and listening to him talk to people that weren't there. Once he called out for his mother, voice soft and frightened like a small child. That's what stuck with me the most, how small he sounded. While Dad hovered in the place between worlds, I stayed with his sister. My days were a blur of finals that I failed and classes I barely absorbed. At night, I crashed on my aunt's stiff couch. What I remember most is how well I slept in those few weeks, and how much I hated myself for it. I always slept better away from home. Dad pulled through somehow. Against the odds, he came back to us. But something had changed in him, and in all of us. We didn't know it then, but this was just the first steps of something even worse. But that threshold hadn't been crossed yet, not for many years to come. I wish I could say that this was the only scare with my father, but misfortune would come again and again. I was a senior in high school. The cancer came back. It had first appeared when I was in the 8th grade, cells blooming like rot in the lining of his bladder. This time it was much worse. The chemo was brutal, and Dad had to undergo a radioactive wash. I still remember the way he cleaned the toilet after with spray bleach, arms trembling, trying to scrub something he couldn't even see. I'm not sure how much good it did, but he tried. By the time I had reached my last semester, the cancer had been beaten back again, but it had cost my father. It had aged him, hollowed him out. With the missed income and my father's medical bills, we were struggling. Finances frayed, I helped in whatever way I could. Paid for my own food, my phone, all the extras. Prom, senior gear, little things that added up. I covered it all with my part-time job and told myself I didn't mind. Things did start to get better after I walked that stage. The house felt lighter. The thing, whatever it was, seemed to be further away. Not gone, never gone, but distant, like a storm that had rolled past. Its presence changed, less constant, less suffocating. It began to come and go like the seasons with no pattern I could make sense of. When it was at the house, I knew it immediately. I'd feel it in the walls, in the static hum of the air, in the way shadows stretched just a little too far at dusk. Sometimes I could sense it pacing in the yard or walking the gravel driveway, keeping just outside the windows, watching, waiting. But when it was gone, it was truly gone. No footsteps, no flickering lights, just absence. Maybe it had found someone else to haunt. Maybe it needed to feed, and we were all used up. I didn't ask questions. You learn not to after a while. A week after graduation, I met someone older, confident. I fell harder than I expected to. By the end of the year, we were engaged, and I was gone from the house, moved out, moved on. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The thing didn't follow, not at first. Those early years away were quiet, peaceful even. I could breathe without dread pulling in my lungs, sleep without bracing for creaking footsteps or sudden door slams. I thought I had escaped. But the thing was never just part of the house. Its reach was longer than I understood. Its power wasn't gone, only dormant. And when the time came, it would call me back. End of part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for part 2.